I'm starting off with the yellow flower, mixing up a little bit of dilute Hansa Yellow Light. You can use lemon yellow or cadmium yellow pale. Using a large mop brush, painting wet on dry, just some pale yellow leaves, adding a little bit of buff titanium mixed with the yellow, wet into wet, just to create some sort of more shadow colours. I'm mixing up some raw umber for the centre, but you can use a limey green, a little bit of yellow with cerulean. So I'm painting this wet on dry using the tip of this large mop brush. And if you notice, it does actually bleed into the yellow paint. Now I am going to paint this whole picture sort of and not dry it. So I will have a few bleeds. So if you don't like bleeds, which is what's happening now, you may want to wait for your painting to dry in between stages. But I want this painting to be very loose. So I'm moving on to the rose here to the right, wet on dry with Hansa Yellow Deep. If you don't have that, you could mix your yellow with a pinch of red to make a yellow sort of orange colour. Using a little bit of the light there, the Hansa Yellow Light, and sort of pushing it around. So I'm working from the centre of the rose outside, working from the inside out rather. And if you notice, I've left some white paper as well for some highlights there. I'm using some quinacridone gold. You can use raw sienna to paint some of the outside petals here. Dilute brush with very, very dilute yellow and just painting the bigger petals on the outside of the flower, which are lighter as well in tonal value, and just printing with my brush. Mixing up a little bit of blue and yellow here. You can use cerulean with the yellow and just sort of painting some of the leaves. So I'm moving on to a yellow flower on the outside to the left here, using the large mop brush, sort of rolling my brush to get a nice natural sort of outside edge. Using a little bit of that quinacridone gold, dropping it in damp into wet there. And I'm just adding the Hansa Yellow Deep with the quinacridone gold to paint the sort of underneath side of the rose. Rinsing my brush, a little bit more Hansa Yellow Light, dropping that in damp into damp. And just painting some leaves, wet on dry, a little bit more yellow, gone back to that size 14 large brush, and I'm painting another yellow flower on the outside edge. So I've mixed up alizarin crimson here, working wet on dry on the star of the show in the centre of this sort of arrangement here, this floral arrangement. I've also got a little bit of the quinacridone rose as well. You can use permanent rose. So this is all wet on dry, but I'm sort of tickling the edge there, and I've got a little bit of a kind of cauliflower developing in the middle as well. So just working around the outside edge there and adding a touch more of the pink, quite creamy, really get lots of paint. I absolutely love these Daniel Smith semi-moist hand poured watercolor paints. They are amazing. I just love this box of colours, and I'm using all of the colours, just experimenting all the time. It's quite nice if you've got pans because you can dip in straight away, but I do use watercolour tubes and I squeeze them into empty pans as well. It's another thing I love to do. So I've actually mixed up ultramarine with the alizarin crimson here, really, really creamy, to paint some darks now on this central flower, and just sort of working in the middle and then a few darks here and there. And I will be using some plastic wrap to place on top of this wet flower shortly, just to let you know, but just sort of tickling on this dark damp into damp. I've rinsed my brush and I'm just adding some water just around the outside edge there to dilute the colour, and hopefully this will help with the plastic wrap to create some wonderful marks. So I'm just adding a little bit more wet around the edge there as well. Here goes the plastic wrap. I just sort of press it down, manipulate a little bit, not too much. I allow it just to do its own thing and just have fun with it. And I'm just sort of twisting my brush to create some lovely sort of different sort of shapes there, more natural shapes. Adding ultramarine to that green, pressing down and lifting off with the tip of my brush there to create these darks, varying the darks as well. So I'm going to use some plastic wrap. I'm just placing it on top of the leaves, not trying to make even the markings and veins of leaves, just trying to create some shapes and markings, keeping everything a little bit loose and semi-abstracted. Painting this paler, pinker rose here. It's not as deep and red. So I'm starting off quite sort of pale in the middle, lots of water on my brush, using the quinacridone rose and my size 8 brush. Lots of water there and just adding watery pink, just allowing the paint to run. I must say it is a very sort of therapeutic way of painting. Paint this more orangey rose here, so I've used the Pyrrole red with the Hansa Yellow Deep. It's quite pale to begin with, so I've added water to that to make sure it's a nice pale wash, mixing up a little bit more of the Pyrrole red, painting that wet into wet, sort of in a circular way, starting from the center to give it that impression of a rose, and again using the plastic wrap and placing that onto the wet paint, a little bit of a manipulation, and let it dry. And bit by bit I'm painting each flower and the leaves. So I'm going to really pretty much paint the other leaves later, and you can wait for your painting to dry, but I'm just going to paint the whole thing in one go. So I'm mixing up a very dilute cerulean. It's got a pinch of yellow, painting wet on dry the glass vase. I'm not going to go into detail with this. I want to keep it sort of understated. It is quite blurry in the photograph, and I quite like that. I want the flowers to be the stars of the show. So mixing up a little bit of green, blue and yellow here, painting wet into wet, a little bit more ultramarine there, sort of painting sort of stems wet into wet there as well. Lots of water on my brush, very dilute cerulean, painting the right hand side of the bottom of the glass vase there. So mixing up a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Light with the sap green, loads of water. I'm just going to paint some light green paint, first of all, wet on dry, and I'm painting around the white flower. And as you saw there, I did peel off the last bit of plastic wrap from that rose there. But what I did notice is some of the green is running down into that rose. So I've just discovered something, that actually the plastic wrap actually stops the paint from running in to the flowers there, which was quite interesting. So just painting some more darker leaves just around that pink rose, going down sort of in front of the vase there, and just sort of painting just across that pink rose and adding a little bit more green here to sort of bring out the yellow flower here, pretty much wet on dry in this area. So I've decided to tilt my painting and to spritz these leaves here. I felt they were quite dominant. I want to soften them a little, not altogether. I just want to push them back a little and just let that drizzle down. And I'm just using my spritzer bottle. And I'm going to collect the water and paint there with my paper towel. And I quite like that effect. It kind of sort of gives you sort of softness. So I'm using a reservoir brush here. You can use a rigger or even your twig. I'm just using some of the dark green. I'm just pulling out sort of stems and longer sort of thinner leaves just to kind of loosen up this sort of tight bouquet. So using that reservoir brush again, which is like a rigger inside a round brush, and that round brush part of this brush holds lots of paint, and it's because it's a nice long sort of thin brush inside it. It gives you lovely sort of flicky sort of marks, which I'm doing there, and sort of twisting my wrist around and sort of flicking the brush to allow sort of nice natural looking darks to happen. So I'm just sort of making this up as I go along, but it's to really sort of create some darks and details just here and there, kind of really in a loose way, just to kind of really go beyond the boundaries of the sort of how the photograph is and even how the painting is, and just sort of have, just really explore different sort of marks and shapes, etc. So I've left the white flowers to last, and I'm just going to paint the centres using yellow and cerulean, like a limey green there, and then just paint a little bit more dark around that centre. adding some details to the roses here using some of the alizarin crimson with a pinch of ultramarine. A little bit more crimson here. Took the excess paint off on the paper towel, just adding a little bit of colour there. Swishing my brush through the rose and just softening with a little bit more water, adding some more pink just in the centre, again rinsing my brush and just diluting, shaping the centre of that rose there. Adding a little bit more detail to this rose here, just below the middle, wet on dry, using the alizarin with a pinch of ultramarine. And I'm just adding a little bit more dark to the centre of that white daisy, a little bit of the Hansa Yellow Deep just to brighten up the centres, touch more dark around the edge there. And the star of the show, just adding a little bit more dark to the centre here. Just the eye goes there, just a little bit of alizarin crimson with the ultramarine. And I've just decided to lift off some of the dark here with my paper towel and just paint back a little bit of the Hansa Yellow Deep just to brighten up the centre of that flower. And I'm just finishing off the flowers here, adding a few more darks and details to finesse them, just to bring them to life. A little bit more red here to the centre, using a very watered down ultramarine with a pinch of yellow for a sort of a grey blue, and a little bit more there, just using what's left in my palette, a swish there using that size 8 brush. And it's just to ground this vase as well, make it look like it's sitting on the table, and just softening and blending away those marks there to finish off my painting. And here is the finished painting. I really hope this tutorial has inspired you. And if you want to see the longer extended version with lots more voiceover, lots more detail about colour mixing, etc., why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials, downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. All you need to do is click the word Patreon in the description below and it will take you to my Patreon membership. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.